9:33 on a Tuesday morning. A silver Escalade pulled into the lot at Merrick Custom Woodworks and idled too long before the driver got out. The woman who stepped down wore a blazer the color of slate and carried a slim portfolio under one arm. She did not look at the sign above the shop door. She looked at the building the way people look at something they have already decided about. She crossed the gravel in 4 steps, opened the door without knocking, and set a single sheet of paper on the nearest workbench. Mr. Merritt, Hargrove Development is donating the millwork inventory from the Callaway Street teardown. My assistant filed the paperwork this morning. You'll want to arrange pickup within 72 hours or we send it to the landfill. She glanced once around the shop, the sawdust on the floor, the hand-cut joinery drying in the corner clamps, the crayon drawing of a house taped to the side of the router table. I trust that's manageable for an operation of this size. She left before he answered. The door swung shut on its own spring. Reed Merritt stood at the bench with the paper in his hand for a long time. Outside, the Escalade reversed and pulled away without hesitating. He read the sheet twice. Hargrove Development. Callaway Street Revitalization Project. Donor release form. Standard language. Non-negotiable terms. At the bottom, a signature in dark ink. Sloan Hargrove, CEO. He set the paper down and walked to the back of the shop where the lights were better. He picked up the phone and called his sister in Knoxville, which he had not done in 4 months. He said only, "You have to come down here. There's something in the Callaway inventory you need to see in person." He hung up before she could ask why. The Callaway Street building had been a furniture manufacturer from 1948 to 1991. What Hargrove Development called the millwork inventory turned out to be 1,100 linear feet of old-growth black walnut milled on-site before most living woodworkers had been born. The pieces were covered in 40 years of paint-over spray and grime. They had been stacked in the sub-basement, which the demo crew had not yet reached. 3 of the panels still carried pencil marks on the back, stock numbers, grades, the initials of the man who had cataloged. RLM. Reed Merritt's grandfather had been Robert Louis Merritt. He had worked at that plant from 1953 to 1969. Reed stood in the sub-basement with a flashlight and did not speak for several minutes. His sister Cara arrived at 2 in the afternoon, took one look at the stack, and sat down on a source without saying a word. They were going to landfill this, Reed said. Cara looked at the pencil marks in the back of the nearest panel. She traced the initials with one finger. "How much time do you have?" "The demo crew comes back Monday. That's 6 days. Then we start tonight." That same afternoon, in a glass and steel office on the 14th floor of the Hargrove building in downtown Knoxville, Sloan Hargrove sat across from her project manager and reviewed the Callaway Street timeline. The teardown was behind schedule. The permit for the new mixed-use structure was contingent on breaking ground by the 1st of the month. Every week of delay cost the development company $40,000 in carrying costs. The sub-basement crew flagged some lumber, the project manager said. He set a photo on her desk. Stacked panels covered in grime. Old growth. They weren't sure if it had value. Sloan looked at the photo for 2 seconds. It went to donation. Move on. She had not been to the Callaway Street site herself. She had driven past it once, 3 months ago, when the project was first acquired. A block of aging commercial real estate in a neighborhood her firm was repositioning. She had looked at the building, the way she looked at every building her company bought, as a set of constraints and opportunities, nothing more. She closed the project folder and moved to the next one. That night, Reed and Cara worked until nearly midnight, pulling panels from the stack and loading them into the cargo van Reed had borrowed from a neighbor. The sub-basement was low-ceilinged and cold. Reed's daughter Maeve sat in the van's front seat in her school coat, asleep by 8:30, a chapter book still open in her lap. She was 7. She had her mother's stubborn jaw and her father's habit of going quiet when things got serious. Cara looked at the sleeping girl through the windshield. "She's good." "She helps," Reed said. He lifted another panel. "When she's awake, she hands me the flashlight before I ask for it." It took 4 trips over 2 nights to move everything. When the demo crew arrived Monday morning, the sub-basement was empty. The project manager walked down, looked at the clean floor, and marked the task complete without calling anyone. By the end of the first week, Reed had the first panels in the shop. He stripped paint by hand because a chemical bath would have raised the grain. The walnut underneath was exactly what he had known it would be. Dense. Figured. The kind of wood that had not come out of any American mill in 30 years. He worked with the deliberateness of someone who understood that what he was holding could not be replaced. Kara came down from Knoxville on Wednesday with 2 people. Reed trusted. A finishing specialist named Drummond and a millwork restorer named Bud, who had been doing this work since before Reed had his first shop. The 4 of them fit in the space only because they had spent years doing exactly this kind of work in exactly this kind of cramped room. Maeve came in after school each afternoon and sat on the stool in the corner with her book. Sometimes she watched. Sometimes she did her spelling homework. On Thursday, she brought Reed a mug of black coffee without being asked. "Miss Kara says Grandpa touched these boards," she said. "He did. Does that make them special?" Reed set down the scraper. He turned and looked at his daughter for a moment. "It makes them real," he said. Maeve considered this. She went back to her book. The shop was quiet except for the sound of Drummond's plane finding the edge of a panel 2 stations down. The second week started with a phone call Reed had not expected. A real estate attorney named Gerald Oakes, calling on behalf of Hargrove Development, needed a supplementary acknowledgement signed. Donation documentation required an itemized list of all materials removed from the Callaway site. He would come to the shop at 11, if that was convenient. He did not ask if it was convenient. Oakes arrived at 11 with a leather briefcase, a press collar, and the practiced efficiency of someone who billed by the quarter hour. He set 3 pages on Reed's workbench, pointed to the signature lines, and waited. Reed read all 3 pages. He read them slowly, clause by clause, the way his grandfather had taught him to read any contract involving material he had not seen with his own eyes. Oakes watched him with careful neutrality. Reed finished reading. He picked up the pen. Then he stopped. "This itemization lists the inventory as miscellaneous reclaimed lumber, donor assessed value $400. That's correct. I'd like to amend it." Oakes blinked once. "The value was assessed by the development office." "I know. I'm telling you what it actually is." Reed set the pen down. He walked Oakes to the first panel, the one he had finished stripping that morning. Old-growth black walnut, pre-war milled, 1,100 linear feet. Figured grain, no sapwood. Pencil graded on the back. He said the market replacement value slowly enough for a non-specialist to follow. Oakes wrote a number on his notepad. He looked at it. He did not speak for a moment. "I'll need to verify this with Ms. Hargrove." "I figured you might." Oakes gathered the unsigned pages without comment and left. Reed watched the car pull away from the window. He turned back to the bench and went back to work. 2 days later, Sloane Hargrove's Escalade came up the road toward the shop and parked where Oakes had parked. She came in without knocking, as she had the first time, but she stopped 3 steps inside the door because the first thing she saw was an 11-foot panel of black walnut leaning against the wall at a height that made the room feel different than it had before. She stood there longer than she had intended. "Ms. Hargrove." Reed came from the back. He had a finishing cloth in his hand. He did not offer to shake hands, not because he was rude, but because his hands were not clean and he did not pretend otherwise. "My attorney tells me you disputed the assessed value." "The assessed value was $400. The material is closer to $40,000 at current market." She looked at the panel again. The donor release was filed. The terms were standard. "The terms were legal," Reed said. "I'm not disputing the terms." He paused. "I'm telling you what you gave away." She had not been prepared for that. She had come expecting a negotiation, a number, a demand. She did not know what to do with a man who was simply telling her the truth without asking for anything. She walked toward the panel. She was close enough now to see the grain, the long, even figure that only came from timber that had grown slowly in old forest, never forced. She had a design degree from Vanderbilt that she had not used in 11 years. She had forgotten, until this moment, that she knew what old-growth wood looked like. She put her hand on the surface. Who graded this? My grandfather, in 1961. She turned to look at him. He met her gaze and did not fill the silence. I didn't know this was in the sub-basement, she said. I know. She took her hand off the panel. She picked up one of the scrap pieces from the edge of the work table, turned it over, and looked at the pencil markings on the back. She set it down without asking about the initials. How long will the restoration take? Another 4 weeks, maybe 5. She nodded once, as if she were filing the information. She looked around the shop one more time, the tools in their designated places, the panel drying in the corner clamps, Maeve's crayon drawing still taped to the router table. She did not comment on it. She walked back to the door. If you finish what you started, she said, let Oakes know. He'll note it in the file. She did not say why she wanted to know. She did not say what she planned to do with the information. She left. Reed stood in the empty shop for a moment. Then he walked to the panel she had touched and put his hand in the same place hers had been. The wood was the same temperature it had always been. He went back to work. She drove back to Knoxville with the radio on low. She told herself she was annoyed. She had come to close a loose end and instead had left with her hand on a piece of wood that had been graded by a man who was probably dead, while a mechanic, a woodworker, told her the truth about what her company had thrown away. Not the whole truth yet. She could feel the rest of it sitting just outside which she could see clearly. She called her assistant from the car. Pull everything we have on the Callaway Street building. Previous owners, previous tenants, any vendor relationships going back to the original construction. She paused. And find out who RLM is in the context of the building's history. Her assistant called back before she reached the highway. RLM was Robert Louis Merritt, stock foreman, Callaway Furniture Company 1953 to 1969. His grandson was Reed Merritt, sole proprietor of Merritt Custom Woodworks, currently operating out of a shop on Route 11 outside Asheville. She set the phone on the passenger seat and watched the road. By the start of the 3rd week, something had shifted. Sloan came back to the shop on a Tuesday without telling her office. She said it was to check progress on the Oakes notation. She sat on the wooden stool near the window and watched Reed work for 45 minutes without asking questions. Drummond and Bud acknowledged her with a nod and went back to what they were doing. She took no calls while she was there. On Thursday, she came again, this time with a cup of coffee from a place she had found on the drive-in. She brought a second cup and set it on the bench near Reed without saying anything. He picked it up and kept working. Maeve came in at 4:15, dropped her backpack in the corner, noticed the stranger, and walked straight up to her. Did you bring Dad the coffee? I did. He doesn't take sugar. I know, I asked. Maeve looked at her with the frank appraisal of a 7-year-old determining whether someone was worth further investment. Do you want to see what I'm reading? It has furniture in it. Well, a wardrobe. But it's basically furniture. Sloan opened her mouth and then closed it. She said yes. They sat in the corner near the window, the book open between them on Maeve's knees. Maeve narrated the relevant wardrobe passages with editorial commentary. Sloan listened without checking her phone, which was something she had not done in the presence of another person in longer than she could clearly remember. From the bench, Reed kept working. He changed the sandpaper grit once and did not look up. But his hand slowed, just barely, for about 30 seconds. The 4th week brought something Reed had not expected. Petra Voss, VP of Acquisitions at Hargrove Development, walked into the shop on a Friday morning while Sloan was in Knoxville. Petra was efficient in the way that people are efficient when their job is to solve problems before anyone finds out there was a problem. She set a manila folder on the workbench and folded her hands on top of it. Ms. Hargrove asked me to handle the Callaway file directly going forward. There's a complication with the donation paperwork. What complication? The materials removed from the site may fall under the salvage rights clause in the original acquisition contract. Hargrove Legal is reviewing whether the donation was properly authorized. Reed looked at her steadily. The donation was filed by your office. Authorized by the Development Committee, yes. But if the salvage value exceeds a threshold defined in the acquisition agreement, there are grounds to reclassify the transfer and recover the materials. She tapped the folder. We'd be prepared to offer fair market value. I have an appraisal inside. Reed did not open the folder. How much? 8,000. He was quiet for a moment. That's about a fifth of what it's worth. Petra's expression did not change. That's our offer. Does Miss Hargrove know you're here? A very short pause. I handle acquisitions for Miss Hargrove. That's not what I asked. Petra picked up the folder. She said she would be in touch. She walked to the door, and before she opened it, she looked once at the panels along the wall, all 11 of them now stripped and drying in sequence, the grain running clean and even and dark as good river water. Something crossed her face that was not quite an expression. Then she was gone. Reed called Kara that night. He did not tell Maeve what had happened. He told her instead that he was going to be busy for a few more weeks, and that he needed her to keep bringing him coffee because it helped him think. Maeve said that was fine and that she would also bring crackers because thinking made people hungry. He said that was good logic. She went back to her book. On Saturday, Sloane came back to the shop early, before the crew, before Maeve was up. She found Reed at the bench with his grandfather's grading book open, cross-referencing pencil marks against the back of each panel to confirm the sequence. She stood in the doorway for a moment before he heard her. She apologized for Petra. He looked up. She was not someone who apologized often. He could tell by the way she did it, carefully, without hedging, the way you say something you have rehearsed in your head on a long drive. She was acting on her own, Sloane said. I found out last night. I went back through the acquisition file. And she came to the bench. She set down a folder, not Petra's folder, but one with the Hargrove corporate seal at the top. The salvage clause she cited doesn't apply to donated materials. She knew that. She's been managing the Callaway acquisition from the beginning, and she structured 3 of the donation transfers this year to route materials to a secondary buyer. Different prices on the paperwork than the actual sales. Reed looked at the folder without opening it. She's been doing it at 2 other properties, Sloane said. I found it in the variance reports last night. I couldn't sleep. She paused. The walnut wasn't the first time. The room was very quiet. Through the window, the early light was coming in long and flat across the shop floor. How long has she been with you? 6 years. She was my father's hire. She said it flatly, not as an excuse. My father died 14 months ago. I took the company when I was 38, which was not the plan. Petra had been running acquisitions alone for 8 months before I got fully across everything. She paused again. I was not paying close enough attention. Reed was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry about your father. She looked at the panel nearest to her, not at him. He would have known what this wood was the minute he saw it. He wasn't in the industry, but he knew materials. He had a good eye. She was quiet a beat. I used to think I got that from him. I'm not sure anymore. You put your hand on the panel the first time you saw it, Reed said, before you said anything, before you asked a question. She did not answer, but she also did not look away from the wood. Maeve came in at 8:15 in her socks, carrying 2 pieces of toast on a paper towel. She stopped when she saw Sloane, recalibrated in the way the children do, and walked directly to the bench. I made extra, Maeve said, and set 1 piece of toast in front of Sloane with the certainty of someone who has never doubted that food is the correct response to any situation. Sloane took it. She held it in both hands without eating for a long moment, looking at the grain of the walnut panel across from her. Then she took a bite. And for the first time since her father's funeral, her shoulders came down from where she had been holding them. The 5th week moved differently. Sloane came to the shop every day. She did not explain this to anyone at Hargrove. She told her assistant she was managing a material recovery situation directly, which was true enough. She sat in the shop and watched, and sometimes asked questions about the wood, and Drummond answered her with the patience of a man who liked anyone who asked a real question and waited for the full answer. On Wednesday, she and Maeve worked through a picture book about trees. Real trees, not metaphor trees, and Maeve explained with great seriousness that black walnut was also called Juglans nigra, which she had looked up. "Why did you look it up?" Sloane asked. "Because it's in our shop," Maeve said, as if that were the only possible reason. That afternoon, Reed walked her through the grading book. He showed her how his grandfather had marked each board, the letters, the numbers, the simple code that had let one man keep track of 1,100 feet of material in a basement without a computer. She looked at the handwriting for a long time. "He worked there 16 years, she said. 17. He left when the machinery changed and they stopped hand grading. He kept the book. He kept everything he thought deserved to be kept." She set the book down on the bench, carefully. She did not say anything for a moment. "My father kept records the same way. Paper, pen, margin notes. After he died, I threw out 3 boxes of folders in the first month because I thought they were administrative." She paused. "I don't know what was in them." Reed looked at her. She was looking at the grading book, not at him. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because I understand now why you didn't just sell the wood and walk away." He was quiet for a moment. "You could have come here angry when Oaks called you. You could have pushed on the salvage clause yourself. I thought about it. But you didn't." "No." She looked up. "I came here to see what we'd given away. And then I kept coming back, which I didn't plan." "Why did you keep coming back?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at Maeve, who was in the corner carefully writing Juglans nigra in the margin of her spelling notebook, with the gravity of someone preserving important scientific data. "Because nothing here is pretending to be something it isn't," Sloane said. "I spend a lot of time in rooms where everything is performing." Reed looked at his daughter for a moment too. "She doesn't know how to perform yet. I'm hoping it takes a long time." "She won't," Sloane said. "She has good instincts." They stood side by side at the bench, and neither of them said anything for a while. The shop made its familiar sounds around them. Bud was planing in the back. The clamps held their pressure against the edge joints in the corner. The grading book sat between their hands on the bench, not touching, close. The following Monday, Reed and Drummond moved the first restored panel to the display stand Reed had built at the near end of the shop. 11 feet long, the figure running in long, dark waves. The surface finished in a hand-rubbed oil that had taken 3 coats and 2 full days to apply. It looked the way materials look when someone has worked them past the point of adequacy and into something else. Sloane came in at 11. She stopped when she saw it on the stand. She watched toward it slowly, the way people approach something they are not sure they deserve to look at directly. She stopped 3 feet out and stayed there. "Can I touch it?" Reed nodded. She put both hands flat on the surface. She stood that way for a long time without speaking. The wood under her palms was smooth and cool, and it held the light differently than anything she had seen come out of a fabrication floor. She had been in the construction and development business for 11 years, and she had spec'd materials on 47 projects, and she had never stood in front of something like this and felt the way she felt now. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked. "Someone from the Preservation Committee at the Tennessee State Museum reached out last week. They're restoring the original lobby of the 1929 Travelers Building in Nashville. They needed figured black walnut and didn't think they could source it." He paused. 1,100 linear feet is exactly what they need." She was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell them?" "I told them I'd call back after I'd talked to you." She took her hands off the panel. She looked at him. "You didn't have to do that. The wood came from a building in this region. It should stay in this region." He paused. "The museum is the right home for it. But it felt like something you should be part of deciding. Your company's name is on the donor paperwork." She turned back to the panel. "My father would have wanted it there. I thought he might." She did not ask how he knew what her father would have wanted. She looked at the grading book on the nearby shelf, the hand-graded marks that had waited in a basement for 60 years, and she understood that some things communicate without needing to be explained. "Call them back," she said. "Tell them yes." That afternoon, Petra Voss received a letter from Hargrove Legal notifying her that she was placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation into the disposition of salvageable materials at 3 Hargrove development properties over the preceding 18 months. The letter was signed by Sloane Hargrove directly, without routing through Petra's own department. By the end of the week, the external auditor's preliminary report confirmed what the variance records had shown: $380,000 in fraudulent material disposition across 4 projects, sold privately to a salvage broker in Atlanta with whom Petra had a personal financial relationship. The broker's records showed the Callaway walnut had been flagged for acquisition by Petra's contact before the donation paperwork had even been filed. She had planned to recover it after the donation, through the salvage clause she had tried to invoke with Reed, and sell it through the same channel. Sloane read the preliminary report in her office on a Friday evening with a cup of tea that went cold on her desk. When she finished, she set the report in the center of her desk and did not move it. She sat for a long time in the quiet of the office. She picked up the phone and called Reed. He picked up on the second ring. She could hear the shop in the background, a radio low, the sound of a plane finding an edge. "The audit is done. I wanted you to know before it went to the board." She told him what it said. She told him the full number. She told him what Petra had intended. He did not speak for a moment. In the background, the radio played something she didn't recognize, something with a steel guitar. "You didn't have to call me tonight," he said. "I know. I wanted to." A pause. "You asked me a few weeks ago why I kept coming back to the shop. You didn't answer." "I know." She looked at her cold tea. "I think I was trying to find out if I still had the thing my father had. The thing that made him walk into a room and know what was real and what wasn't. And I think I'd stopped using it. For a long time. I'd gotten very good at other things and I'd stopped using that particular one." "It doesn't go away," Reed said. "No, it doesn't." A long pause on the line. "The panel looked good," she said. "Whatever you did to the finish in the last coat. Beeswax in the oil, old method. It shows." Another pause. Not uncomfortable. The kind of pause that exists because nothing needs to be added and both people know it. "Good night, Miss Hargrove." "Good night, Mr. Merritt." She set the phone down. She looked at the window, which showed her the city below and the dark sky above, and her own reflection layered over both. She left the office without turning the desk lamp off, which she never did. She drove home thinking about beeswax. 3 weeks later, Sloane stood in the lobby of the Travelers Building in Nashville while the installation crew fitted the first panel into its mounting on the east wall. The lobby was high-ceilinged and quiet. The original terrazzo floor cleaned back to its 1929 pattern. The plasterwork above the main doors restored to what the historic photographs showed it had been. Reed stood 6 feet away at the edge of the work zone, watching the crew. Maeve was beside him in her winter coat, holding a small notebook in which she was recording the panel dimensions and careful numerals. She had asked to come. He had said yes before she finished the sentence. The panel went up in 2 sections, fitted at the joint, the seam invisible at any normal viewing distance. When the crew stepped back, the lobby changed. The wood did what old-growth wood does in a room built to hold it. It made the room make sense. It made the proportions resolve. It made the light do something different. The museum's director, a woman named Arthur Greer, who had held the position for 22 years and had never once asked a donor to attend an installation, stood quietly at the center of the lobby and looked at the east wall for a long time. "Where did this wood come from?" she asked. "A furniture factory on Callaway Street in Asheville," Sloane said. "Built in 1948. The wood was milled on-site. It was graded by hand by a man named Robert Louis Merritt." She paused. "His grandson restored it." Arthur looked at Reed. "How long did the restoration take?" 7 weeks. "What would have happened to it otherwise?" Reed looked at Sloane. Sloane looked at the panel. "We would have lost it," Sloane said. Maeve looked up from her notebook. She studied the panel on the wall with the same careful attention she gave to the wardrobe in the book, to the spelling of Juglin's Niagara, to the right way to hold a flashlight in a basement. "It looks like it was always supposed to be here," she said. Nobody disagreed. On the drive back to Asheville, Sloane sat in the passenger seat of Reed's truck while Maeve slept in the back under his shop jacket, the notebook still in her hand. The highway came down out of the hills, and the last of the daylight was somewhere behind the clouds ahead of them. "She's going to be good at this," Sloane said quietly. "At what?" "At knowing what things are worth. The real kind of worth." Reed watched the road. "She gets that from her mother." It was the first time he had said that in front of Sloane. He said it the way he said things that were true, without preamble, without armor. Sloane did not ask. She looked at the road ahead, the white lines coming at a steady pace. "My father said once that the best developers weren't the ones who saw what a building could become. They were the ones who saw what it already was." She paused. "I've been building careers on the first half of that and forgetting the second. You remembered this time. You made it hard to forget." She glanced at him once, briefly. "You didn't argue with me. You didn't make demands. You just kept working on things that deserved to be worked on." Reed looked at the road. "That's all I know how to do." In the back seat, Maeve shifted in her sleep and pulled the jacket up higher. The notebook slid an inch but stayed in her hand. They drove in silence for a long time. The hills came down around them, and the lights of Asheville rose in the distance. It was the kind of quiet that settles between two people who have stopped performing and not yet decided what to call what comes next. When they pulled into the lot beside the shop, Sloane did not immediately get out. She looked through the windshield at the building, the hand-lettered sign above the door. The light on inside that Reed's timer kept going until 10. The sawdust still on the welcome mat from the morning's work. She said, "My office has been calling the Route 11 property the Callaway Recovery Project for the last 3 weeks." Reed looked at her. "I told them to stop." She paused. "It's not their project." He looked back at the shop. "What is it then?" She thought about it for a moment with the seriousness she had been learning to apply to questions that did not have efficient answers. "I think it's yours," she said. "It always was." Maeve woke up when the truck stopped moving. She looked out the window, saw the shop, and was unbuckled before either adult could reach her door. She ran to the entrance, key ready from the hook she had been trusted with since she was 6, and let herself in. The light inside jumped from one lamp to the next as she moved through the space she had known her whole life. Through the windshield, Reed and Sloane watched her. There was nothing to add to what had already been said. There was nothing to decide tonight that needed deciding tonight. The wood was in Nashville, where it had been going for 60 years without knowing it. The shop was here. The light inside was on. He did not reach for her hand. She did not lean toward him. They sat at the same distance they had been sitting all the way down from Nashville, which was not far and was not close, which was the distance that felt accurate and honest, and which neither of them was in a hurry to change. Some things have their own timing. Some materials reveal themselves only after you've worked them carefully and kept your hands steady and not forced the grain. That was something both of them now knew well enough not to need to say aloud. I keep thinking about the moment Sloane put her hand on that panel of black walnut and went quiet. Not the boardroom version of quiet, where someone is calculating what to say next. The real kind. The kind where something gets through. She had walked into Reed's shop twice already, acting like she already knew what she'd find. A small operation. A routine file to close. And then she touched the wood her own company had signed away for $400. And she stopped. That moment didn't happen because of luck. It happened because Reed had done something very specific. He had kept working on something that deserved to be worked on, even when nobody was watching, even when the easier path was to cash out quietly and move on. I think about that a lot, the way integrity isn't usually dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up in whether you strip the paint by hand, because a chemical bath would raise the grain, even though no one would ever know the difference. It shows up in whether you call someone before selling the thing they gave away, even when you have every legal right to sell it without calling anyone. Reed had that. His grandfather had it before him. It ran in the family the way grain runs in old wood, deep, consistent, not something you can fake or fabricate after the fact. And Sloane. I don't think she was a bad person. I think she was a person who had gotten very good at speed, at efficiency, at making decisions with incomplete information and moving on. Grief does that to people. Responsibility without preparation does that. She took over a company at 38, still processing the loss of her father. And she trusted the wrong person because trusting Petra felt like one less thing to carry. That's not weakness. That's human. What took real courage was what she did when she found out. She didn't manage it, didn't minimize it, didn't route it through legal to soften the edges. She handled it directly. She called Reed that night herself. That matters. There's something I believe about consequences that has nothing to do with punishment and everything to do with accuracy. What you build on a false foundation doesn't hold. Petra built 6 years of influence on misdirection, and the minute someone with clear eyes and enough stillness to actually read a variance report sat down with the records, it came apart. Not dramatically, just accurately. The numbers said what they said. What I find harder to explain, and more worth paying attention to, is what happened to Sloane in that shop over 7 weeks. She came back. She kept coming back. She sat on a wooden stool and listened to a man explain old-growth grain and didn't pretend to know more than she did. She let a 7-year-old teach her about Juglans Negra. She let herself be in a room where nothing was performing. That takes a particular kind of intelligence, not the kind that scores well on assessments, but the kind that knows when to stop talking and let something teach you. Maeve already has it. She's 7, and she already knows that things worth understanding deserve your full attention and a notebook. Reed gave her that, not by explaining it, by doing it every day in a shop that smelled like sawdust and old oil, where the work was real and the standards didn't change based on who was watching. I don't know what you're working on right now. Maybe it's something small that nobody else thinks is worth the time. Maybe it's something that got taken from you, or misread, or filed under the wrong category by someone who didn't look closely enough. What I know is this. The wood waited 60 years in a basement. It didn't stop being what it was. And the right hands found it eventually, because the right hands kept showing up. That's the only plan that has ever actually worked.